The open road had always been a siren call for me, a chance to escape the monotony of daily life and dive into the adventures that lay just over the horizon. My daughter Emily, with her fierce independence and unquenchable curiosity, was the perfect companion for such escapades. She had just turned 15, and the world still shimmered with mystery and possibility in her eyes. Our latest journey had taken us through the heart of America, a tapestry of small towns and forgotten byways that promised new stories at every turn. As evening crept upon us, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. We were far from any town, surrounded by nothing but the dense embrace of the forest. The last rays of the sun dipped below the tree line as we spotted a sign for a motel, its neon lights buzzing faintly in the twilight. It was a rundown place, the kind of establishment that clung to the fringes of highways, offering solace to the weary and desperate. Emily, sensing my hesitation, flashed me a reassuring smile. "It's just for one night, Dad," she said, her voice laced with an optimism I found both endearing and contagious. The clerk behind the counter was a peculiar man, his smile too wide, his eyes darting nervously as he handed us the key to our room. There was something unsettling about him, a sense of wrongness that I couldn't quite place. He was overly nice, his voice dripping with an eagerness to please that bordered on obsequious. As he spoke of the motel's amenities, his words seemed to hang heavy in the air, like a mist that refused to lift. I thanked him, eager to end the conversation and retreat to the relative safety of our room. The room itself was a relic from another era, the air thick with the scent of must and decay. The beds were neatly made, the linens threadbare but clean. Emily, ever the adventurer, explored the small space with a curiosity that belied the room's mundane appearance. "It's got character," she declared, a grin spreading across her face. I couldn't help but smile back, her enthusiasm infectious, despite the unease that knotted my stomach. As night fell, the motel took on a different character. The neon sign outside our window flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the room. A sense of isolation descended upon us, the realization that we were alone in this place, cut off from the world outside. Strange noises began to pierce the silence of the night, whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Emily, her bravado from earlier replaced with a quiet apprehension, stayed close to me as we tried to make sense of the sounds that surrounded us. The first incident occurred just after midnight, a soft tapping at the door, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, more insistent this time, as if someone were trying to get our attention. I approached the door, every instinct screaming at me to stay away, but curiosity drove me forward. I peered through the peephole, but there was nothing but darkness on the other side. The tapping ceased, replaced by a silence that felt oppressive, as if the very air had been sucked from the room. As I returned to the bed, Emily's eyes met mine, a silent question within them. I had no answers to give, only a growing sense of dread that we had stumbled upon something far beyond our understanding. The night stretched on, each creak and whisper amplifying our fear, until the faint light of dawn began to seep through the curtains. We had survived the night, but the true horror of the motel had yet to reveal itself. The morning light did little to dispel the sense of unease that had settled over us. Emily and I shared a quiet breakfast in our room, the events of the night before hanging between us like a shroud. Despite the daylight streaming through the window, a part of the night's darkness lingered, a shadow that refused to be dispelled by the sun. Our conversation was sparse, each of us lost in our own thoughts, pondering the strangeness that enveloped this place. Deciding to stretch my legs and shake off the remnants of fear, I stepped outside, leaving Emily to gather our things. The motel, bathed in the harsh light of day, looked even more forlorn, its facade worn and neglected. A walk around the building revealed a parking lot at the back, its surface cracked and overgrown with weeds. Here, a collection of cars lay scattered, some appearing as though they had not moved in years. Rust ate at their bodies, and their tires had succumbed to the relentless march of time, flat and defeated. The sight sent a chill down my spine, the number of cars far exceeding the guests I imagined this motel could entertain on any given night. An unsettling thought wormed its way into my mind. Were these the vehicles of those who had come before us, lured by the promise of rest only to find themselves ensnared in whatever malevolence lurked within? The day wore on, a heavy, oppressive atmosphere settling around us. The air itself felt thick, charged with a silent anticipation. Attempts to explore beyond the immediate vicinity of the motel were met with an inexplicable resistance, an invisible barrier that urged us back toward our room. Emily felt it too, her earlier enthusiasm dimmed, replaced by a wariness that mirrored my own. As night approached once more, the motel seemed to awaken. The air vibrated with a palpable intensity, and the sound of distant screams shattered the illusion of solitude. Rushing back to our room, I found Emily staring out the window, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that, Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I could only nod, my mind racing to make sense of the sounds that had pierced the stillness of the night. Determined to protect Emily, I ventured outside, my steps hesitant, yet driven by a desperate need to understand. The parking lot, bathed in the glow of the motel's flickering sign, felt like a stage set for some macabre performance. The screams had ceased, replaced by a suffocating silence that seemed to mock my efforts to uncover its source. As I made my way back to our room, the sensation of being watched became overwhelming. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, slipping away each time I turned to confront them. The oppressive atmosphere intensified, a tangible weight upon my chest that made each breath a struggle. It was as if the very air sought to drive us out, to protect the secrets that lay buried within the heart of the motel. Returning to the safety of our room, Emily and I huddled together, the darkness outside pressing against the windows, a silent sentinel. We spoke little, our conversation a mere whisper against the chorus of whispers that seemed to fill the room. The events of the night before were no longer isolated incidents, but part of a pattern, a tapestry of terror that we were now entwined in. As the hours passed, the oppressive feeling grew, a foreboding that something was coming, something that lurked just beyond the veil of shadows. The night deepened, wrapping the motel in a blanket of impenetrable darkness. Emily and I sat in our dimly lit room, the faint glow from the motel sign outside casting long, sinister shadows across the walls. Our conversation had dwindled to nothing. Words felt trivial, inadequate in the face of the growing dread that filled the room. The oppressive air, thick with anticipation, seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. It was then that we first saw it, a shadow that drifted past the front window, its form vague and indistinct, yet unmistakably human. Emily gasped, her hand gripping mine with a strength born of fear. The shadow paused, as if aware of our gaze, before slipping away into the darkness. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to flee, to protect my daughter from whatever malevolence we had stumbled upon. But where could we go, isolated as we were, with no signal to call for help and the nearest town miles away? The tension in the room escalated as the doorknob began to turn, silently, slowly, as if whatever stood on the other side was testing our defenses. I rose, moving toward the door, my movements deliberate, trying to mask the tremor in my limbs. Emily's voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the thick air. "Dad, what are we going to do?" I had no answer, my mind racing through futile plans of escape. The phone, our last link to the outside world, lay useless in my hand, its screen mocking me with its lack of service. The power flickered then, plunging us into darkness, the motel sign's erratic glow now our only source of light. It cast an otherworldly illumination, shadows and light warring across the room, painting a scene that felt lifted from a nightmare. The shadow returned, more defined now, its silhouette pressed against the blinds, a specter watching, waiting. My breath caught in my throat as I stood frozen, Emily's presence behind me both a comfort and a reminder of the stakes. The air grew colder, the electric charge of impending doom making every hair stand on end. In that moment of heightened terror, a plan formed, desperate and wild. If we could reach the car, if the keys were where I had left them, we might have a chance. Whispering my thoughts to Emily, I saw determination light her eyes, a fierce will to survive. We gathered ourselves, moving quietly, every sense attuned to the shadow that lingered just beyond our sanctuary. But as we prepared to make our escape, the door shook with a sudden force, a pounding from the other side that threatened to splinter wood and shatter resolve. The shadow was no longer content to watch. It sought entry, a malevolent force driven by desires unfathomable. Emily and I, united in fear and purpose, pushed against the door, our combined strength barely enough to hold back the assault. As the night waged on, the boundary between our world and the one that pressed against us from the shadows grew thin, a membrane stretched to its breaking point. Our resolve, our very sanity, hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of despair. The realization that we might not survive the night settled over us, a cloak of inevitability that was as suffocating as the darkness itself. The relentless pounding on the door ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a silence so profound it thrummed in our ears. Emily and I exchanged a glance, a mix of relief and terror reflected in our eyes. The shadow that had menaced us from the other side seemed to recede, but the reprieve felt temporary, a mere pause in the storm. We knew we had to act, to escape before the darkness returned with renewed vengeance. Gathering our courage, we made for the bathroom window, the smallest and most overlooked point of egress. The window, stiff from years of neglect, resisted at first but eventually gave way to desperate force. One by one, we slipped through the narrow opening, the cool night air a shock to our senses after the stifling atmosphere of the room. The ground greeted us with a jarring thud, a physical pain that was almost welcome in its tangibility. Our car was tantalizingly close, yet as we approached, the realization hit us with the force of a physical blow. The keys were gone. Panic rose, a tide threatening to drown us in despair. We were trapped, caught in a nightmare from which there seemed no awakening. It was then, in our darkest moment, that we decided to seek out the motel clerk, the only other soul in this forsaken place, our last vestige of hope. The office was dimly lit, a haven of normalcy that belied the horrors that unfolded under its watch. The clerk, his demeanor transformed from obsequious to sinister, greeted us with a smile that chilled the blood. "You can't leave," he said, his voice a melody of malice and triumph. "Not until the balance is restored." His story spilled forth, a tale of generational curses and dark bargains struck in desperation. His family, bound to serve a demon who demanded souls to sustain his presence in our world, had maintained their grim duty for centuries. The motel, a lure for the weary and the lost, served as a hunting ground, a place to fulfill the demon's insatiable hunger. "But the demon grows hungry," the clerk whispered, his eyes alight with madness. "And it has been so long since he has fed. Either you take up the mantle or your daughter will pay the price." The choice was no choice at all. A primal, fierce protectiveness surged within me, a resolve to do whatever it took to save Emily. The climax of our confrontation was swift, fueled by desperation and love. The clerk, mortal after all, fell to our combined assault, a final act of defiance against the darkness, but our victory was short-lived. As the clerk's body hit the ground, the air shifted, a chill that penetrated to the bone. The demon, freed from the constraints of its pact, emerged from the shadows, a figure of pure malice. It spoke of a new bargain, a choice between two evils, to become the new guardian of this cursed place or to sacrifice what I held most dear. The decision tore at me, a wound that would never fully heal. But as I looked into Emily's eyes, I knew there could only be one answer. I would take the mantle, bear the curse, to ensure her freedom. The demon smiled, its form dissipating into the night, leaving behind a silence that was both a benediction and a curse. As dawn broke, casting light on the horrors of the night, Emily and I embraced, a moment of solace amidst the ruins of our world. She would leave, carrying with her the promise of a life unburdened by the shadows that now belonged to me alone.